this weekend about some of the challenges you will face on campus when you try to bring conservative ideas in, often in the midst of great opposition. If you're here from CSU LA, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I want to remind you that conservative activism, campus activism, can also be a lot of fun. You can poke the left using a variety of tools, and of course social media is your friend. Take our intern, Eric, who introduced himself a few minutes ago. This week, like many of his peers in Hollywood, Danny DeVito was feeling the burn. And he decided to show up at UCSB expecting to find a lot of other students also feeling the burn, not expecting to find someone like Eric among the crowd of Bernie supporters on campus. So here's Eric with his shirt covered with YAF stickers, posing with Danny DeVito. But Eric did one better than that. He also shoved a copy of our In Defense of Free Enterprise pamphlet into Danny DeVito's hand and got him to sign it. Not too bad, Eric. That's blackmail material for sure. So well done. Well, to formally introduce our speaker this afternoon, if you're a student, you probably already know Amy well. She probably recruited you for this very program. If you don't know Amy and Pat well, part of your mission this weekend is to get to know the two of them. You're going to find that they are some of the best resources you could possibly have when you face trials on campus, when you want to plan effective campus events. Amy came to us from Kansas originally, but as she said, she's a graduate of St. Louis University, where she brought in David Limbaugh, S.E. Cupp, Jonah Goldberg, and helped organize the 9/11 Never Forget project on that campus. Now she's a program officer for Young America's Foundation, where her job involves student outreach and recruiting, planning student programs here at the ranch, and then working with you directly on your campuses to execute successful campus events and initiatives. Please welcome Amy Lutz.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited to introduce our featured speaker today because he might not know this, but he indirectly introduced me to Young America's Foundation. When I was a freshman at St. Louis University, we requested through the foundation to bring David Horowitz to campus. And the school initially said yes, but decided later that he was too controversial and banned him from campus. We said he could appear with a liberal professor. We tried to make concessions, and they said no. So I realized two things then. Number one, that my campus was not at all conservative, and that I needed to work with Young America's Foundation to bring in other speakers, as Andrew mentioned. Unfortunately, we weren't able to bring David Horowitz. We almost tried, we tried and they banned him, but we did bring Jonah Goldberg, S.E. Cupp, David Limbaugh, and other speakers. So David Horowitz is a nationally known author and lifelong civil rights activist, but he was not always a conservative. He was one of the founders of the New Left in the 1960s and editor of its largest magazine, as Ron mentioned, Ramparts. In the 1970s, he created the Oakland Community Learning Center, an inner-city school for disadvantaged children that was run by the Black Panther Party, who also showed up at CSULA, for those of you who were there. In the 1990s, he created the Individual Rights Foundation, which led the battle against speech codes on college campuses and compelled the entire president's cabinet of the University of Minnesota to undergo 5 hours of sensitivity training in the First Amendment for violating the free speech rights of its students, which more campuses probably need today. In 1996, he was a spokesman for the California Civil Rights Initiative, which barred government from discriminating against or granting preferential treatment to any individual or group on basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin. In 2002, he joined Ward Connerly's campaign to pass a racial privacy initiative. David Horowitz is the author of numerous books, including an autobiography, Radical Son, which has been described as the first great autobiography of his generation, and which chronicles his odyssey from radical activism to the current position he holds. Among his other books are The Politics of Bad Faith, The Professors, the 101 Most Dangerous Academics in America. I'm sure we can add to that list in 2016. Indoctrination U, One Party Classroom, and Reforming Our Universities. His book, The Art of Political War, was described by White House political strategist Karl Rove as the perfect guide to winning on the political battlefield. In 1998, Horowitz created the Center for the Study of Popular Culture as a vehicle for his campaigns. It was renamed the David Horowitz Freedom Center in July 2006 to institutionalize his campaigns against the left and its anti-Americanism. David Horowitz is a very good friend of Young America's Foundation. He has spoken at over 300 colleges and universities, and that number is certainly growing. He was just at USC most recently. He also received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the foundation, so he's definitely one of our most favorite campus speakers, and I'm sure has plenty of stories to tell all the students in the audience. He has appeared on a number of media outlets, including Nightline, Crossfire Today, Hannity, O'Reilly Factor. He appears regularly on The Dennis Miller Show and gives hundreds of interviews yearly on radio and television. So please help me welcome David Horowitz.
Thank you. I met Ron Robinson 28 years ago, and I've been working with him, and now Patrick as well, ever since. And I just want to say I work with a lot of organizations, but this Young America's Foundation is the most important weapon I know in the struggle to defend this country and give hope to people everywhere, because without America, there is no hope. And that's because, unlike the Republican Party, Young America's Foundation is willing to fight. And the only way to fight fire is with fire. You have to be as aggressive as they are. And I'm thrilled to meet, I've talked to some of the young people here, to meet our younger conservatives, because they have that spirit in them. And Young America's Foundation is responsible both for a lot of that fire and also for educating our activists, which is why you're here today. I'm going to talk about progressive racism, both because it's an evil in itself and also because it's the chief weapon of the left against us. And I'm going to begin with the most important progressive racist, which is the President of the United States, who said that racism, he said, and of course he meant white racism, is in the DNA of America. This is probably the most malicious statement a U.S. president has ever made against his own country. It's also totally false. Slavery existed in Africa for 1,000 years before a white person ever set foot there. Europeans did not go into Africa and throw nets over people. They went to slave markets and bought people who had already been enslaved by African kings. Slavery existed for 3,000 years in all countries. So everyone here, if you go back far enough, is descended from slaves. It was just when there was a war, you conquered the enemy and enslaved them. That's just the way it went. And for 3,000 years, no one ever said that slavery was immoral. Not Aristotle, not Moses, not Jesus, until at the end of the 18th century, Wilberforce and some Protestant Christians in England said it was immoral. And on the other side of the ocean, a new country was born. And in its birth certificate was written the proclamation that liberty and equality are God-given rights that government can't take away. It was written by a slave owner, Thomas Jefferson. But within a generation, or a little over a generation, about 80 or 90 years, you always hear about 400 years of slavery in America. America was created in 1776 or 1787, depending how you want to date it, so it's like 80 years. But within that generation, slavery was abolished in America and throughout the Western Hemisphere. Every black person alive in this country and in the Western Hemisphere owes their freedom to Thomas Jefferson and the founders and the 350,000, not exclusively, but mainly white Union soldiers who gave their lives to free the slaves. It's liberty is the DNA of America, not racism. When I was, this is very important because in addition to being an attack on whites and an attack on the United States, it's an attack on blacks. Black people were here before the Mayflower. I mean, there's no American more American than American blacks. Black culture, you can't talk about American culture without black culture. So what it's done is it's alienated, and particularly younger people, particularly people you're likely to meet in college, alienate them from their own heritage, as does the term African American. Africa is not a country. I don't know how many languages are spoken in Africa, but there are a lot. You know, well, I don't have to go on about that. When I was, I grew up, of course, in a communist household, and when I was 12 years old, approximately, a book came into the house. It was called We Charge Genocide. And it was a petition that an organization called the Civil Rights Congress was going to take to the UN to condemn the United States because of lynching and segregation. And you can put up this picture. At the front of this book was this very disturbing photograph. Can you put up the photograph? There it is. I mean, that was it's disturbing now. It was very disturbing to a 12-year-old. And you can see symbolically, it's white people hanging two young black men. This is the most famous lynching photograph. It's the one that inspired Billie Holiday's song, Strange Fruit. It took me years to understand the significance of this photograph and this book, We Charge Genocide. When I studied lynching, I discovered that a third of the people who were lynched were white. So it wasn't a matter of just stringing up black people because of their skin color. It does have a racial dimension, as obviously if 2/3 of the victims were black. But what lynching was about taking the law into your own hands. It was about not waiting for the due process. These young men, there were actually 3 of them, were arrested for murdering a young white worker and raping his girlfriend. The rape charge turned out not to be true. The woman said that she hadn't been raped, but the murder charge was accurate. These 2 young men murdered to rob him, the young man. This lynch mob broke into the jail and strung them up from the tree. I learned many years, and the vast majority of lynchings were always, it was taking justice into your own hands. And I bring, as a criminal, I bring this up because we have these cases today, although it's short of stringing people up, but taking the law into your own hands is what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, where in advance of any evidence, what I would call a lynch mob, it's the same mentality, led by Black Lives Matter, burned the town, which is majority black, so the people that they hurt were black people by burning those stores. And what motivated them was a desire to hang Darren Wilson, the police officer, for one reason only, because he was white. No evidence. When the evidence was in, and the evidence exonerated the police officer, it turned out that Michael Brown was not arrested, or the arrest attempt was not made because he was black. It was made because he had committed a strong-arm robbery. And the person who said he had his hands up and was saying, "Don't shoot," was the accomplice in the robbery. When the investigations were done, the grand jury and the Holder Justice Department, it turned out that the officer was innocent. He had been attacked in his squad car, and an attempt made by Brown to wrestle his gun from him. He was given 6 warning shots, but that doesn't affect the lynch mob mentality of the left. Years later, it takes a long time. It took me a long time. What I told you about slavery was something I learned as an adult. I certainly didn't learn it in school. And I did it by reading all the scholarly books that I could get my hands on slavery. Maybe 30 years later or 40 years later, it's interesting, just happened to be listening to actually National Public Radio. And as I said, there were 3 men. The third was 16-year-old, this is a young man named James Cameron. They were all arrested for the murder and rape, and they were all in jail, and they were broken out of the jail. But the lynch mob did not lynch the 16-year-old. He said that he had not participated in the murder. And a white woman in that lynch mob said that he was telling the truth. So they spared him. He was arrested and served 8 years in jail for being an accessory before the fact, and then he devoted his life to civil rights. But that tells you another thing. I mean, even a lynch mob was concerned about guilt and innocence. I mean, not the way they should have been, which is you have to have the due process. And even that lynch mob was not just lynching people because they were black, because they spared this young black man. Here's the other interesting thing that I also found out many years later. The Civil Rights Congress was a Communist Party front. The campaign to go to the UN and charge genocide came from Moscow, because something also I learned, even though I grew up in the communist world, really, was that this has only been fully established since the fall of the Soviet Union and the archives were opened up. But the Kremlin ran the American Communist Party, also funded it. We always used to laugh in the left about Moscow Gold, but it's perfectly true as being funding the party. Why did the Kremlin want to launch this campaign at this time? Now, you have to, well, only a few people here would remember, but as a result of the Second World War, where America fought against the master race, the Nazis, that was their religion, they were the master race. America had a seizure of conscience about segregation and discrimination. And in 1947, the military was integrated, and then I actually marched in 1948 to support Harry Truman was integrating the civil service, and a couple of years later, it was the schools, and that was the threshold of probably the most dramatic revolution in social relations in the history of the world. In 1940, black Americans were 4% of them were in the middle class. By 1960, it was 49%. Just a dramatic change, and it's even more dramatic today. In 1958, when anthropologists, when they're looking at how minorities are integrated into a majority culture, the key index is attitudes towards interracial marriage. In 1958, only 4% of Americans approved of black-white marriages. And we know that a lot of the lynchings had to do with rape cases of white women. 4%. Today, it's 87%. Now, 13%, probably believe that Elvis is on the moon. So that's equivalent of like 100%. So why did the Kremlin want to run a campaign at that time to accuse America of a genocide of blacks? It's because Stalin was purging the leadership of the Czechoslovakian Communist Party. There was this show trial. It was called the Slansky trial because Rudolf Slansky was the general secretary of the Czech Communist Party. 11 of the 13 defendants were Jews. They were all hanged. So what this was a campaign to neutralize the criticism of Russia for doing the Nazi thing and hanging Jews. And that tells you the most important thing that I probably have to say today. And that is, this campaign was not about black people. It was not about caring for black people. It was about using black people as a battering ram against this country, which is exactly how the Democratic Party uses the black community today. If you just think about it for 2 seconds, every major inner city in America, every killing zone, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., is 100% controlled by the Democratic Party and progressives, and has been for 50 to 100 years. Everything that's wrong with the inner cities of America that policy can affect, Democrats are responsible for. They have their boot heels on the necks of poor black and Hispanics, and particularly their children, because the Democrats and their teacher union slush fund organizations control every failing school in the inner city that year in and year out does not teach black or Hispanic children how to read and write and do arithmetic to the point where they can succeed in our society. And I understand this because my grandfather was so poor. He was a tailor. They made him sleep at the factory under the sewing machine. But they sent their kid to a school that taught him. He went to college. He became a teacher himself. And his son became whatever I became. But the ladder of success has been taken away by Democrat-controlled schools from these children. And they will fight to the death to keep those kids in the schools. They will fight the voucher programs, which are scholarship programs, to give the money directly to the parents so they can find a school that will teach their kid. This is a social atrocity. And I am sorry to say that Republicans collude in it because they never mention it. What is wrong with the Republican Party? Why doesn't the Republican Party hold its convention in Detroit, a city which in 1961 had the richest per capita population in the United States? It was the industrial jewel of America. But in 1961, a Democrat was elected mayor. And over the years, the Democrats got their 100% control. And they proceeded to do what Democrats do, to attack business, to attack white people. Unbelievable. 2/3 of the population of Detroit fled. Detroit is bankrupt. It looks like a bombed out city if you've seen it. The Democrats did that. Why are Republicans saying this in every speech they give? Beyond me. If 20% of black Americans voted for Republicans instead of whatever it is, 7%, Democrats would lose everywhere. It's mind-boggling to me. I've been saying this now for 20 years. I'm hoping this younger generation will take up this cause. And you can have a lot of fun with the leftists on your campus by just throwing it in their face. And you don't have to know, it's easy to remember this. And it's worse too, because if you're a welfare mother, the only security you have is what's in your night table drawer. You don't have a gated community. You don't have security guards. You don't have Secret Service like Hillary. All you can is a firearm. And the Democrats are doing everything they can to take the firearms away. I mean, just sort of put yourself in an inner city, a high crime area. And of course, the welfare system, which is it's the greatest crime against black people since slavery. Greater than segregation, because segregation, the black community had a thriving culture and businesses and so forth. But welfare, people who receive welfare, the first thing they do is they drive the fathers out of the home. If there's a father in the home, you can't get the welfare. If there's a male earner, you can't get it. So you have a single mother who has to take care of children and somehow and earn a living. But if she earns that much more than the welfare payment, they take the welfare payment away from her. So why work? It's just catastrophic. And then they do something even more diabolical. They say, well, if you have more children, we'll give you $200 a child, so you can all be poor forever. That's what it is, but where are the Republicans and the conservatives saying this? Why aren't they being aggressive and taking the offensive? What's happened in this country, and it's a great tragedy, and it started with the death of Martin Luther. It started actually before the death of Martin Luther King, because the political left did not like King. Once the Civil Rights Acts were passed, Stokely Carmichael, who's a rank racist, I mean, of course, comes from elite families. It's like this kid who organized the Missouri. His father's a multimillionaire. How oppressed is he? I mean, you have these elites who are using black people as a battering ram. That's what it's about. In my day, civil rights was about civil rights. I mean, the most famous case was that of Emmett Till. He was a 12-year-old black kid from Illinois who went to visit relatives in, I think it was Mississippi. If it wasn't, it could have been. And was accused or allegedly whistled at a white woman. And he was brutally murdered. I mean, it was a horrible image of his body. Who are the civil rights heroes today? They're career criminals, predators, and who do they prey on? Black people, poor black people. Freddie Gray, scum of the earth, a drug dealer preying on the inner city of Baltimore, who got himself killed. Nobody knows how. I don't think there's the slightest chance that the police had anything to do with it. But he was in the van alone or with another criminal who said he was banging his head against the walls. And his family has been paid off by the racist Baltimore City Council and mayor, and that racist, incompetent attorney general or whatever she's called in the state of Maryland. I mean, this is a disaster. Baltimore, this is 50 years of Democrat rule, taking black people for granted and using them. So his family got $5 million. And the same thing is true of Eric Garner. He was a career criminal. He's got an arrest record, I forget how many, 30 arrests. He wasn't choked to death. He died in the ambulance. Why did he die in the ambulance? Because he was morbidly obese. He had lung problems and heart problems and diabetes. And his body couldn't take the shock that he got because he was resisting arrest. And the officer in charge of the arrest on the scene was a black female cop. This is like cloud cuckoo land that we live in now. Come on. And nobody's calling out these organizations. This Black Lives Matter, which is funded by Soros and the government, the communist government unions, the SEIU, and is officially endorsed by the Democratic Party, and has caused the deaths of numerous black people by attacking police. That's the civil rights movement today. It's a lynch mob, out to lynch police and to white people. They don't even care if the officers are black. Oh, here is where we are culturally. How many people know the name Ta-Nehisi Coates? No, you will. Your teachers will see to that. Ta-Nehisi Coates is the most pampered racist in America. His father was a Black Panther. He's black. He didn't ever graduate college, but he was made a visiting professor at MIT. He was offered a column in the New York Times, which he turned down. He's been given a $650,000 MacArthur Genius Award. I think he's an editor at The Atlantic. And this year, his book, it's called Between the World and Me, which is written in the form of a letter to his son. It's an endless racist rant is what it is. I mean, of the order of racism is in the DNA of America. He tells his son that when a cop murders an innocent black, that's just carrying out America's heritage. That's the kind of things that he says. His best friend was killed by a police officer, was black, in Maryland, because the officer said that he was attempting to run him over with his vehicle. Turns out the officer is black. So how does Coates deal with this? Well, he was thinking white. So it's the devil made him do it. The white devil. Does it sound like Louis Farrakhan or what? And this is an organization officially endorsed by the DNC and supported by 46% of Democrats, half the party. And again, we're partly responsible for that because the Republicans won't touch this stuff with a 10-foot pole. The Baltimore government should be a laughingstock and worse for what they did to those police officers. By attacking police officers and making it, Darren Wilson's life has been ruined. The innocent man, because he was white. He can't be a police officer. So police do, the sensible thing. They stop doing their jobs the way they were doing them. They're not aggressive in stopping crime. And if they are communists like the mayor of New York, de Blasio, will stop them. Stop and frisk was very helpful. When Giuliani was the mayor and started these tough policies, the murder rate, which is mainly a murder rate of blacks because that's who black criminals usually kill, is blacks. Do you know 97% of the homicides in New York are committed by blacks and Hispanics? If you took the criminal element of the black and Hispanic community, which is a minority element, out of the picture, America would have one of the lowest homicide and crime rates in the world. Another unmentionable fact. I will say, for all his faults, or all the way his ego gets in the way of everything, Bill O'Reilly has done a very courageous thing by starting to talk about this. Until O'Reilly was talking about it, it was only people like me with no microphone. So you've got to give him credit for that. And I like to think that, know that all his producers read my website at frontpagemag.com, and I like to feel that we had somewhat of an influence. But until the right has the courage to take on this battle, it's not going to change. If you can get away with murder, it's human beings do it. They do it. The root cause of the social problems, after all, is us. Anybody who has read the first 18 chapters of Genesis knows that. We were given paradise, better than Bernie's socialism. Everything was free, no pain, live forever, but there's one thing you can't do. and that's eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's like when you're on a diet and there's one thing you're not allowed to eat, that's all you want. It's people is the problem. And that's why government is not the cure, because government is only people with lots more power and ability to get away with things. In his book, this is such a terrible book that won the National Book Award. And just, you go up on the, you kids live in such privileged times, knowledge-wise. I used to have to go into find the library at Columbia that had, these dusty old books and figure out how to find the book in these card. You guys just go up on the internet and all the answers are there. So here, Ta-Nehisi Coates claims that the beauty that Malcolm X pledged us to protect, black beauty, was never celebrated when he was a kid, he's saying. And he grew up, never celebrated in movies, never celebrated in television or in textbooks I'd seen as a child. Everyone of any importance, from Jesus to George Washington, was white. Coates was born in 1975. He was 8 years old when Martin Luther King became the only American to have a national holiday in his honor. And who did he bump? George Washington. We used to have George Washington's birthday on February 22nd. And Abraham Lincoln's, I forget what, I was also in February, I think maybe the 12th. And to make room for Martin Luther King, they created President's Day. So what the heck does that mean, President's Day, for the two of them? Washington, in other words, was just sent to the back of the bus for Martin Luther King. The first motion pictures championing civil rights for blacks, one I saw as a youngster called Home of the Brave, which was a Broadway play about anti-Semitism. And they changed it to be about persecution of blacks. That was 1949. Sidney Poitier won the Academy Award as Best Actor for his role in Lilies of the Field, not as a victim of racism, but as a terrific guy, in 1964. In 1960, Harper Lee's novel about racial justice for blacks, To Kill a Mockingbird, won the Pulitzer Prize and went on to sell 60 million copies. I think it's the best-selling novel ever. That was it. In 1977, television featured Roots, which was an epic miniseries about black oppression and white evilness. That was the most widely viewed show of its time. More than 30 million Americans saw it, and it won a score of Emmys. So Coates, typical of Black Lives Matter crowd and of the left and of progressives, just makes it up. And he makes it up because no one has the gumption to challenge him. So I'm thrilled when I see Donald Trump say that Bill Clinton is a rapist, because I'm waiting for the Republic. I'm waiting for Reince Priebus to face down Debbie Wasserman Schultz and saying, what are you doing with that racist party that is responsible for putting racial categories everywhere? The Civil Rights Act said government can't use racial categories, and neither can institutions. It's outlawed. However, as everybody knows, to get into college, to get a job, it's all racial categories. And who does this, again, who suffers by getting into college with 200 score points below everybody else? You take black kids who could succeed, who could be top of the class at this level of college, and you put them at the bottom of the class in that level. Now, what does that do? It teaches white kids to have racist attitudes towards blacks, like they're not smart. And it makes black kids feel inferior and resentful, and of course that radicalizes them. Because how do you combat that except to say there's institutional racism, it's a racist system, standards are racist. No one ever learned to jump higher by lowering the bar? No one. It's so terrible what's been done to black people and to Americans generally, and to the cause of liberty by progressives and by the Democratic Party. Thank you. You can see why I'm loved on campuses. I have to take bodyguards.
Time
If
for
I didn't take
just,
bodyguards and there was no security, I'd never get through a speech. And I've been physically attacked for this reason.
just one or two questions. Anyone?
Hi, sir. I just wanted to ask a question about radical Islam and the left, if you don't mind. So basically, the left continues to defend radical Islam. Like, for example, there's some student groups called Queers for Palestine, where LGBT groups would actually defend radical Islamic terrorism, and feminists also kind of join in on them. My question is, why is the left defending radical Islamic terrorists when they know?
I wrote a whole book about this called Unholy Alliance. What's happened on the campuses is there's two groups that are organized by the Muslim Brotherhood and agents of Hamas, the terrorist organization, which openly in its charter says we want to exterminate the Jews. It's Nazis. That's Students for Justice in Palestine is one Nazi organization, and Muslim Students Association, which pretends to be cultural and religious, but is actually an arm of the Brotherhood. And the whole left is allied with them, the whole left on campus. So, the source of anti-Semitism now in America is also the source of anti-Americanism. It's the same thing, anti-America. Yeah, I guess that's what it is, anti-Americaism. That's the left. That's who they are. And it's, the Queers for Palestine are idiots. Israel is the only place in the entire Middle East where you can hold a gay pride parade and not be hung from a crane or thrown off a tall building. Very, very sad. And, the college administrations, my writing partner, Peter Collier, once said that the employment profile for a college president is a cross between Saul Alinsky and Neville Chamberlain. That's absolutely true. They're not going to stand up. And again, it's because we're not hammering them. I can't emphasize this enough. You blow them back if you're willing to go in their face. And it doesn't take a lot of research to go in their face. It's just obvious. It's all out there. Why are you defending criminals who prey on black people? The murder rate in Chicago has gone up 70% this year. It's spiked 50 and 60% in Ferguson and in Baltimore. Obvious reasons. The police are not being as aggressive, so the criminals are having a field day.
Hello, Mr. Horowitz. I just want to make a comment first off. As a former affiliated member of the Young Democratic Socialists of America, I'm very happy to see a physical reaffirmation that it's possible to fully leave radical leftism behind. And considering radical leftism and concerning the huge surge of young adults supporting Senator Sanders in our current presidential election, I come across these individuals all the time when I table for my YAF chapter and talking about the economic illiteracy of his policies to just straight up calling them, morally bankrupt for their viewpoints. To you, Mr. Horowitz, what's a personal meaningful statement that you would say to the young adult supporting Senator Sanders?
Well, you have to understand, they have no idea what socialism is. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm a big fan of Jesse Waters. That's the world. It's not just his world, unfortunately. That's it. So, you know, you have to know a little bit more about the history of socialism, and particularly Bernie's brand, which is not Denmark, it's Cuba. He honeymooned in Moscow while the Cold War was on, well, when it was a slave empire. So, you know, you want socialism, you like to see 120 million people murdered, whole continents bankrupted. Or you can do what Bill Whittle does and say, he gave a speech in a college, and he said, how many people are socialists? And they all raise their hand. They say, okay, I want you to all bring your cell phones down to the stage, and we'll put them in a carton here. And then we'll go and distribute them to poor people. Nobody came up. You know, it's just hypocrisy. You just hold them to, somebody here had a redistribution of GPAs. It's a good idea. It's a good idea. So.
Last question in the back.
Thank you for coming and speaking to us, Mr. Horowitz. And my question, specifically, in your speech at one point, you made a brief reference to the presumptive Republican nominee and one way in which you think he is actually standing up and doing something that hasn't been done recently. But there is the subject of, you know, and very much in your speech, you know, how Democratic policies have not been helpful towards minorities, towards people of color. Do you think there is any way in which Mr. Trump can possibly appeal to those demographics which seem to view him very unfavorably?
Yeah, just what I said. If he does to them what he's doing to Bill Clinton, if he does that to the Democratic Party on race, he'll get a lot of black votes. I actually think even now he's going to get more, maybe 10% more black votes than Mitt Romney. I mean, inner city people, or any minorities don't see Republicans standing up for them. And the way for Republicans, and you know, Democrats don't really stand up for them either. But what they do is they attack Republicans as racists. And that sends a message to minorities that somebody's standing up for them. So Republicans, the first move they need to make is to start calling the Democrats racist. For all the things that I said, and then some. You've got to be ready to go in their face. And, you know, and it's a lesson in political warfare you could learn from Trump. That's how he did it. He just put everybody off. Well, I have a book called Take No Prisoners, and it starts with a quote. I heard the quote, actually read it in the New York Times, from a Democratic strategist. But then I found out after I published the book that it actually originated with Mike Tyson. And the quote is, everybody has a game plan until you punch them in the mouth. Think about that one.
Thank you, David. Thank you for being with us. And how about another round of applause, not only for David's remarks today, but for his years of activism for our cause. I'm going to move us pretty quickly to the next stage of your time with us. If you are a student, you are headed to the ranch. And you need to move in that direction pretty quickly, since we're going to have you back this evening for the session with Dave Newton. So I'd encourage you to make your way downstairs, use the restrooms if you need to, and then your shuttle, is it shuttles? 3 shuttles will be out in front of the building momentarily. Thank you again for being with us.